What was Melkor's original plan and purpose? We have taken the time to dive into the History of Middle-earth series, and this has demonstrated how Tolkien's thinking changed over time in regard to his creation. So today we are looking at the being known as Melkor, or once known as Melko, as he was first conceived, and with that, his actions and relationship with the rest of the Valar and Eru himself. This all means that we will look at the purpose in Eru's own schemes and what role that Melkor has to play in the great theme of music which brought the world into being. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this deep dive to the beginnings of time in Tolkien's world.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
Remember everyone, if you find this video helpful, informative, or entertaining today, please remember to hit that subscribe button below. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on any of our latest videos, and you'll be supporting us to continue creating great content like this. Melkor was originally not just about his own plans or mischief. Instead, we are talking about his bigger role in the story of Middle-earth. He changed from the great Melkor to the evil Morgoth. He was very selfish and always wanted what he couldn't get. In the First Age, Morgoth and his army won many battles, except for the Dagor Aglareb. This is a pretty good record. So why was Melkor given so much power to start with? Melkor must be made far more powerful in original nature, the greatest power under Eru. Later, he must not be able to be controlled or chained by all the Valar combined. Note that in the early Age of Arda, he was alone able to drive the Valar out of Middle-earth into retreat. The war against Utumno was only undertaken by the Valar with reluctance and without hope of real victory, but rather as a covering action or diversion to enable them to get the Quendi out of his sphere of influence. But Melkor had already progressed some way towards becoming the Morgoth, a tyrant, and his agents. Without turning this question into an issue of theology, we must say first of all that in Professor Tolkien's own view of his material, he is working with a model in mind of his own invention. In simple terms, Tolkien had an idea called eucatastrophe, which is a good surprise in a story, like when Eru or God helps in the critical moment at the cracks of doom to make things right. This shows Tolkien believed in the power of good. He talked about this idea in a letter to his son Christopher, for example. For it, I coined the word eucatastrophe, the sudden happy turn in a story which pierces you with a joy that brings tears, which I argued it is the highest function of fairy stories to produce. In Tolkien's stories, eucatastrophe is a sudden good turn, like when the Valar helped the Eldar in the War of Wrath and in the First Age, or when Eärendil sailed to Valinor asking the Valar to fight Morgoth. Without their help, Morgoth could not have been defeated. If we read the creation myth in the Silmarillion as roughly comparable to Tolkien's own response to his deeply held and deeply cherished religious beliefs, we can see that this conceptualization of Eru and the relationship he has with evil that is done in the world correspondingly fits with the real issue that arises within the religious paradigm. If God is both good and all-knowing, how does evil come into being? Tolkien is able to tackle this issue head-on in the music of the Ainur, as Melkor rebels and attempts to draw glory unto himself, drawing many of the Ainur to his side and driving others into despair before Eru began a third theme, rebuking Melkor and saying, Then Ilúvatar spoke, and he said, Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor, and that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Ilúvatar. Those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not his uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. In Tolkien's writings, the idea that Melkor's rebellion is part of a bigger musical theme might be his way of addressing the problem of evil. This is similar to the Catholic concept of Felix Culpa, with Felix meaning happy, lucky, or blessed, and Culpa meaning fault or fall, which obviously then, in other words, refers to the idea that good can come from bad events. Tolkien hints at this in Arabeth Finrod a Andrath, the fourth part of Morgoth's Ring, the 10th book in the History of Middle-earth series. This text is perhaps not so well known, but it is worth reading as it gives great insight into Melkor's role and is a great read for Tolkien fans, though I will warn you right now, this is a fairly long one. "They say," answered Andreth, "they say that the One will himself enter into Arda and heal men and all the marring from the beginning to the end. This they say also, or they feign, is a rumour that has come down through years uncounted, even from the days of our undoing." "They say they feign," said Finrod. "Are you then nor one of them? How can I be Lord? All wisdom is against them. Who is the one whom ye call Eru? If we put aside the men who serve the Nameless, as do many in Middle-earth, still many men perceive the world only as a war between light and dark equipotent. But you will say, nay, that is Manwë and Melkor. Eru is above them. Is then Eru only the greatest of the Valar, a great god among gods, as most men will say, even among the Etani? A king who dwells far from his kingdom and leaves lesser princes to do here much as they will? Again you say, nay, Eru is one, alone without peer, and he made Ea and is beyond it, and the Valar are greater than we, but yet no nearer to his majesty. Is this not so?" "Yes," said Finrod, "we say this, and the Valar we know, and they say the same, all save one. But which, think you, is more likely to lie? Those who make themselves humble, or he that exalts himself?" "I do not doubt," said Andreth, "and for that reason the saying of hope passes my understanding. How could Eru enter into the thing that he has made, and than which he is beyond measure greater? Can the singer enter into his tale, or the designer into his picture? He is already in it, as well as outside," said Finrod, "but indeed the indwelling and the outliving are not in the same mode." "Truly," said Andreth, "so may Eru in that mode be present in Ea that proceeded for him. But they speak of Eru himself entering into Arda, and that is a thing wholly different. How could he, the greater, do this? Would it not shatter Arda, or indeed all Ea?" "Ask me not," said Finrod. "These things are beyond the compass of the wisdom of the Eldar, or of the Valar maybe, but I doubt that our words may mislead us, and that when you say greater, you think of the dimensions of Arda, in which the greater vessel may not be contained in the less. But such words may not be used of the measureless. If Eru wished to do this, I do not doubt that he would find a way, though I cannot foresee it. For as it seems to me, even if he in himself were to enter in, he must still remain also as he is, the author without. And yet, Andreth, to speak with humility, I cannot conceive how else this healing could be achieved. Since Eru will surely not suffer Melkor to turn the world to his own will and to triumph in the end. Yet there is no power conceivable greater than Melkor save Eru only. Therefore Eru, if he will not relinquish his work to Melkor, who else must proceed to mastery? Then Eru must come in to conquer him. More, even if Melkor, or the Morgoth that he has become, could in any way be thrown down or thrust from Arda, still his shadow would remain, and the evil that he has wrought and sown as a seed would wax and multiply. And if any remedy for this to be found, ere all is ended, any new light to oppose the shadow, or any medicine for the wounds, then it must, I deem, come from without. And to be perfectly clear, this line of reasoning can be further supported by Eru's subsequent conversation with Ulmo. Now Ilúvatar spake to Ulmo and said, "Seest thou not here in this little realm in the deeps of time, and in the midst of the innumerable stars, how Melkor hath made war upon thy province? He hath bethought him of bitter cold immoderate, and yet hath not destroyed the beauty of thy fountains, nor of thy clear pools. Behold the snow, and the cunning work of frost. Behold the towers and the mansion of ice. Melkor hath devised heats and fire without restraint, and hath not dried up thy desire, nor utterly quelled the music of the sea. Behold rather the height and glory of the clouds, and the ever-changing mists and vapours, and listen to the fall of rain upon the earth. And in these clouds thou art drawn nearer to Manwë, thy friend whom thou lovest." Then Ulmo answered, "Yea, truly, water is become now fairer than my heart imagined. Neither had my secret thought conceived the snowflake, nor in all my music was contained the falling of the rain. Lo, I will seek Manwë, that he and I make melodies for ever and ever to thy delight." Melkor's purpose and original mission in Arda is defined by his actions less so than by his words. He is the foil to all forward progress, a nihilistic being of such immense rage that his greatness works against him as he slowly diminishes in might, with much of his power being exhausted on the working of his dark magic to bring us beings such as like the dragons like Glaura, whose most terrifying gift is neither great mass nor his fiery breath, but rather his terrifying use of hypnosis, his ability to control the minds of men and enslave them. In Tolkien's world, being powerful doesn't always just mean being strong. Even Melkor's disruptions in the music only added to the bigger plan known only to Ilúvatar. Faerie, Mandos's wife, weaves these stories, showing how everything fits together. What did she weave that brought her such renown though? Her tapestries are the very tale of the world, all the lives and all the actions taken by each and every individual to live and die in Arda. Perhaps we can think that for Ilúvatar, he was all-knowing and understood that any good story must have conflict. We can think of the god of Middle-earth as a creator who, like the author of the work himself, is one who treasures stories, and by way of that last moment when the tragic turns into redemption, we see the moment of its turning, the purpose of Melkor, and the way by which people are redeemed every day all over the world, and Faerie exists so that their story might be told, their own personal struggles and points of sorrow, so that when life sweetens, it is akin to the sunrise after the season of darkness. Melkor is ironically a redemptive instrument in the hands of Ilúvatar, since from sorrow only a greater, more appreciated, long-lasting good could eventually arise. And so there we have it, a little look at Melkor's role from the very beginning. This was a bit more of a quote-heavy video, unlike some of those in the past, so I hope that you all enjoyed it. Melkor's role is pivotal, serving as a paradoxical testament to both the fragility and strength of creation. While his disruptive power and rebellion underscore the potential for chaos, they inadvertently validate the overarching redemptive design of Eru Ilúvatar. Just as darkness accentuates the beauty of dawn, Melkor's malevolence underscores the significance of hope, resilience, and eventual redemption in Tolkien's universe. It's through the masterful interplay of light and shadow that Tolkien invites readers to reflect upon the age-old question of good versus evil, illustrating that even in the depths of despair, there's an inherent and profound purpose. Thus, Melkor's original plan, however wicked, inadvertently serves as a catalyst, revealing the enduring nature of hope and the triumphant spirit of creation.
We will start by going back to the beginning, chapter 1 of the Silmarillion. As the theme progressed, it came into the heart of Melkor to intervene matters of his own imagining that were not in accord with the theme of Ilúvatar, for he sought therein to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. As we have said in other videos, in Middle-earth and the works of Tolkien at large, if you see a self-seeking character who is full of vainglory, desire and petty pride, it is unlikely in the extreme they will have a happy ending. But as we are told, Melkor was given the greatest gift of power and knowledge, and he had a share in all the gifts of his brethren. Now if we look at this from the perspective that whatever part of Eru that Melkor represented as offspring of his thought, alongside the share in all the gifts and wisdom of his brethren, the rest of the fragments which together make up what should be whole. But it isn't. Melkor's insecurity is what drives him to attempt to make a mockery of Ainur in Dale, where the trumpets are described as braying, as though it sounded like a dying horse. What Melkor thinks might well be a natural thought as he is one of Eru's children, but it is his duty to make choices that are befitting the dignity of God. First of all, there is more than power and wisdom on Eru's resume. The Song of the Ainulin had created the world and universe as we know it. Each of Melkor's vain intrusions were corrosive and brought into being fell beasts, perhaps the nameless things. By the way, stay tuned for an upcoming video on that. The only thing Melkor lacked to be whole was the substance of creation itself, that of the secret flame, as a certain wizard called it. The narration continues with Melkor seeming in his ways as obsessed with the fire as he would later be with the Silmarils. As he had gone often into the world seeking the flame imperishable, as he had the desire within him to bring into being things of his own, and it seemed to him that Ilúvatar took no thought to the void, and was impatient of its emptiness, yet he found not the fire, for it's with Ilúvatar. Here is our first hint that something might be off with the head of Eru's choir. In the very next sentence there is this ominous passage, but being alone he had begun to conceive thoughts of his own, unlike those of his brethren. This can be read as his attempt from the very beginning to empower himself in the one area he feels deficient to his maker. He cannot create life or imbue a living being with a conscience or a soul. He can only manipulate raw materials provided to him by hook or crook. There are no bounds for Morgoth and no deed too lowly. It is in that searching for the flame imperishable where he discovered something. Desire. His want for more power and need for dominion. The wish to control all life and creatures, even those of his own kin, the Valar. Then, as we saw, Melkor wove his ambitions and self-seeking themes into the Song of the Ainur. This, as it happened, when the earth remained incomplete and Melkor thus claimed the landmass of Arda, which one day bore Middle-earth, and Melkor would seek to dominate it all. In Paradise Lost by John Milton, Satan is highest among the order of angels. Archangels who attend the Lord of Hosts and sing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of Hosts." Of these, one was prideful and desired power over God, and he and the rebellious angels were cast out into the Pandemonium, which Satan made a kingdom of pain. When Melkor makes war on Valinor, he is making war on more than the gods. He is fighting God, with a capital G. It's a small matter, but makes all the difference in the world when it comes to understanding Melkor's inner crisis. As offspring of Iluvatar, these children represent aspects of his thought, but none have the whole picture. In the beginning, God sang a mighty theme, and expounded the theme to the children of his thought. Mightiest of them, Melkor, would surely believe himself to be without equal. In plain terms, a fragment of God's mind must contain within it somewhere that it is God. If Melkor had his part of Eru's mind, all of his actions are those of a competitor or brother deity attempting to wrest control from the other. We must remember these are the mythologies told by what would be the Church of Eru and the Valar. Because of these gifts, a single god cannot abide submission any more than Eru could when his music was challenged. In the final analysis, it seems Melkor was bound by fate to become an opposition figure to Eru, as a means for Tolkien to explain in his own world what we call the problem of evil in our own. The moment of his transformation, however, can be seen in his war on Valinor and the subjugation of the two trees. He and Ungoliant, cloaked in webs of darkness in the unlight, travelled in the highest peak towards the northern end of Aman, where the Valar were less stringent in their guard. Higher and higher they climbed. The web of gloom and doom pulled them up to the summit and they alighted. Melkor pierced the trees and the sap gushed forth like blood, which Ungoliant drank, swelling and growing ever larger and more powerful as she fed. When the Valar discovered the trees dying and approached Fëanor, creator of the Silmarils, to get them and take light inside of the jewels to restore the light of the trees. Fëanor refuses, but he is too late. Melkor had already stolen the Silmarils and slain Fëanor's father, Finwë, the High King of the Noldor Elves. It is on this charge that Fëanor lays the curse of that name, Morgoth, at his feet, cursing him thrice and naming him the Black Foe of the world. This is the name he would go on to earn. Throughout the battles of Beleriand, his constant use of torture, even his mirth at the moment that Húrin accidentally revealed the hidden city of Gondolin, a hidden city built by Turgon that had, before that moment, remained hidden for 385 years. Melkor would wipe it from the world, and as for the name Morgoth, we find out in Unfinished Tales that he rejects this name. There is extensive dialogue between Morgoth and his new prisoner. We find the following conversation between Húrin and Morgoth in Unfinished Tales. And here we find exactly how this once angelic being thinks of himself. Then Morgoth turned upon Húrin, and he said, "Fool, little among men, and they are the least of all that speak. Have you seen the Valar, or measured the power of Manwë and Vardar? Do you know the reach of their thought? Or do you think, perhaps, that their thought is upon you, and that they may shield you from afar?" "I know not," said Húrin, "yet so it might be if they will, for the Elder King shall not be dethroned while Arda endures." "You say it," said Morgoth. "I am the Elder King, Melkor, first and mightiest of the Valar, who was before the world, and made it. The shadow of my purpose lies upon Arda, and all that is in it bends slowly and surely to my will. But upon all whom you love my thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down in darkness and despair." The monster that he is, in this instance, he did not lie. The tragedy of Húrin and his children is proof enough that to be cursed by Melkor or Morgoth, by whatever name he is called, he can be thoroughly relied upon to always make the most selfish, most self-seeking choice, and cares about no one beyond what they can provide him. This trait has been with him from the very beginning, and his tale is that of thinking himself to be God, and always acting as if he was.
Melkor, also known as Morgoth, was one of the almighty divine spirits. These divine spirits were among the first creations in Tolkien's own world, all created by Eru Ilúvatar. This means these divine spirits, also known as the Ainur, were created before even time itself had started. Of these, we know the names of the 15 most powerful spirits, later known as the Valar. These were the ones behind the shaping and ruling of the created world, and there were 7 lords, 7 queens, and 1 other. The 7 lords were Manwë, king of the Valar; Ulmo, king of the sea; Aule, the smith; Orome, the great rider; Mandos, judge of the dead; Lorien, master of dreams and desires; and Tolkas, champion of Valinor. And then we have the 7 queens of Varda, queen of the Valar; Yavanna, the queen of earth; Niena, the lady of mercy; Este, the gentle; Vere, the weaver; Varna, the ever-young; and Nessa, the dancer. These 14 followed the ways of Eru and were great followers of him. However, like in most stories, there was one other, the one that we are here to focus on today, Melkor. So you are probably wondering here, why is a Melkor even on this list? Why is he not amongst his fellow spirits? What makes him different? Well, let's jump into it, and to understand this a little better, we first need to understand Eru's thoughts when creating. As when Eru created these Valar, he did so while giving each of his creations just a glimpse into his thoughts and ideas. And therefore, each of the Valar end up as basically specialists in different areas, aspects, and thoughts of Eru. However, one of these is not like the others. One was not created equal, and that is Melkor. Melkor was created with a greater level of power and knowledge than those around him, meaning, at this point, there is only one being, one entity who is more powerful than him, and that is of course Eru itself. So, although in theory the other Valar may be slightly more powerful in one certain degree, for example, Tolkas had the ability to be able to just about physically overpower him, as a whole, none can come close to matching him. This extra knowledge led Melkor on a slightly different path straight away, for Melkor had knowledge of this thing in Tolkien's world called the Flame Imperishable. And what does this flame do, you may ask? Well, this is the term that the power that Eru had was known by, which was the power to create, and I mean truly create, not just alter or corrupt. This is what gave things life and gave them souls. And a little thing here, this is what Gandalf refers to in his speech on the bridge of Khazad-dûm when fighting the Balrog, when he says, "I am the servant of the secret fire," with that secret fire being another name for the flame imperishable, meaning he is a servant of Eru, a servant of good, to fight this servant of Melkor. But anyway, that is not really too relevant right now. So, during the beginning of time, Melkor had gone in search of this flame, as the thing that he truly desired was to rule and create himself. He wanted to be in charge. He wanted everything bent to his will, not someone else's. He basically just wants to be God. However, when he realized that this power was more a part of Eru as opposed to being an item, he knew that this was really a battle that he could not win. So all his time searching in the void had really been for nothing. Now, at this point, I could not exactly say that time would pass, but after Melkor failed with his plan for gaining the power to create, Eru would bring the Ainur together for an event called the Ainulindale. This would be when the music of the Ainur would come to be. Eru would teach each of them music and song, and together they would sing for Eru, creating the vision of Ilúvatar, which would be the vision of the world we would come to know. However, during their harmony of a song that would not be heard again, one spirit broke this harmony. He sung his own song. And you get no prizes for guessing who that was. Melkor. His song was so strong that some of the Ainur became confused as to what song that they should be singing, even beginning to sing his song over Eru's. So, a second song is sung by Eru. But again, Melkor goes against this new one too, and again this swings some of the Ainur to his song, not Eru's. So once again, for a third time, Eru sings a greater song, even trying to bring Melkor's song into his own now. But Melkor will still not back down. However, in the end, Eru sings his final powerful note to end the music. Eru addresses Melkor. He tells him that he created everything. Everything Melkor is came from him, so whatever he thought to do, Eru already knew. He could not overpower him. Melkor was furious with this, but hid it from all the others. This is then where the vision of Iluvatar I previously mentioned gets shown to the Ainur by Eru, and the Ainur wish for this to be real once they have seen it. And so, Eru created Ea, and this term Ea is what everything that exists refers to, or in another way, the universe, which means you have Ea and the void, being the created universe and the timeless planes outside of it. So, with Ea now a thing, that meant that Arda was now in it, which is the name for the world as a whole. When the Ainur saw this, they wished to mould and help form it into a wonderful place for the children of Iluvatar, except one again. And surprise, surprise, that one is Melkor yet again. He saw this world as not an opportunity to help and support the creation of Eru, but instead a world for him to control, a world for him to rule, a world of slaves to serve him as their ruler and god. Nonetheless, Melkor was still allowed to enter into Ea along with the other Ainur, with those who entered first being the most powerful and becoming those I listed before, known as the Valar, with then lesser spirits going too, which would become known as the Maiar, but they come slightly later. And you may wonder at this point, is Melkor still on his own though? Well, he has actually already turned many of the Maiar over to his ways. Some will openly support him in his thoughts, and others support him in secret under the face of serving a different Valar. So no, he was not alone. He was already building up a team behind him, meaning there was already a battle going on between the Valar, or Melkor against all of the others. After all, Melkor would not exactly hide his ideas now, even saying directly to Manwë's face, with Manwë being his brother, that he would rule this world as the most powerful amongst them all. At this time, Manwë would not fully understand the idea of evil and corruption, but knew that he and the others must prevent Melkor from ruining Ea as a beautiful and peaceful place. And this is where the wars of the Valar really begin. The Valar were trying to shape this clean slate of a planet and form it into something beautiful. However, everything they tried was countered to the opposite by Melkor, for what really appears to come from just pettiness and a want to do things his way. Melkor just simply wishes for nothing to be in the vision of the other Valar, and this went on for a time until the last of the Valar came to Ea, taking on his physical form, with this one being Tolkas, the most war-ready and champion of the Valar. And here, by the way, this whole idea of the Valar, their powers, and what taking these physical forms mean to them is a subject of its own really for a video. So if you would be interested in seeing that video get made, then please leave me a comment below of the Valar, just to show me that there is some interest in seeing this. But now, back to the Wars of the Valar. With Tolkas now entering this plane of existence, Melkor becomes more wary. For although Melkor is a more knowledgeable and powerful Valar in most respects, Tolkas is so physically powerful that Melkor is slightly taken aback. Therefore, at this time, Melkor is driven away and a period of peace is brought to the planet. Which means the rest of the Valar are now able to finish their wish of establishing the world of Arda. The world they ended up forming was a symmetrical one, where at its centre was the land that the Valar themselves chose to live, and this land was called Almaren. And upon this land the Valar created two great lamps to finally bring light to the world, with these being called Iluin and Ormal. However, this light would not quite reach all corners of the planet, so some darkness remained, and within this darkness Melkor still dwelt, plotting his next move, moulding those he could to his ways and waiting for his moment to strike. he would not have to wait too long. For when the Valar came together for a feast of celebration at the completion of their task, Tolkien both married Nessa and then proceeded to drink far too much, becoming too merry and fall asleep. So, with Melkor's greatest threat now incapacitated, he knew the time to act was now. Melkor came out of the darkness, over the walls of night, and moved into the north where he would come to build his almighty fortress of Utumno. And for those of you who don't know, the walls of night were the outer walls of the world that surrounded Arda in the outer days. But anyway, as Tolkien slept for so long, Melkor was able to complete the building of Utumno, and due to this, evil gradually started to flow from its walls. Disease, death, and foul weather gives a hint to the other Valar that Melkor had indeed returned. Which one thing you also have to remember at this point is that the planet does not spin here. There are no seasons to speak of in Arda at this time, so for cold weather to appear is something purely of Melkor's corruption. The Valar knew that they need to find him and stop him before his evil could spread too far. However, before they could do anything, Melkor strikes first. The Valar are taken by surprise by this, and Melkor comes out on top. He destroys the two lamps, bringing complete darkness back to the world and claiming victory over the other Valar. It is said during his attack that it was so great that not only were the lamps destroyed, but also the land of Almaren along with them. And again, along with that, the entire symmetry of the planet got broken too. You may be wondering though, surely couldn't all the Valar together have overcome and attacked Melkor and won? Well, it's not quite as simple as that. Melkor had used such a great amount of his power to destroy everything that the Valar needed to use their powers to prevent the entire world from collapse, which left them really unable to have any remaining fight left in them to fight back against him. So, unable to pursue Melkor, but having stopped the end of their world and let it fall into ruin, the Valar now needed to find somewhere new to reside, and so this is where they chose a man across the sea, building Valinor upon its land. Now living in their new home of Valinor, the Valar need to establish a new form of light for the world. However, they do not build two lamps as they did before. Instead, this time they go for a different structure. This time they build two trees instead, one of gold and one of silver, and they are named Talperion and Lorelin. This angers Melkor as it now meant he must defeat them all over again. However, Melkor was still not ready to launch an attack on the Valar once more, and with Tolkien this time awake, he was wary that they would rise up against him with their combined might. So instead, in these next years, Melkor would build another fortress, with this one called Angband, and this was located beneath Thangorodrim in the Iron Mountains in the north of Middle-earth. Here, Melkor would place a certain commander and his greatest servant that many of you may recognize, and he was called Sauron. So Melkor had now managed to build up an almighty army that consisted of evil creatures, including the likes of Balrogs, along with near unbreachable strongholds. This would not stop the Valar though, and they would launch an attack on Melkor, and this would fail, and the Valar would get pushed back to Valinor. Melkor would not sit idle in his victory though, and he would continue to delve deeper into the earth and build more to his great fortresses. He would also come to learn of the awakening of the elves at this time too. Melkor made it his mission to find them, which he did before any of the other Valar managed to themselves. He killed and captured so many of them, with this being the event that it is believed that caused the creation of the first orcs, which came as a result of the unimaginable twisting, torture, and then breeding forced upon them. It would not take too long before the Valar found the elves themselves though, as they feared that Melkor would capture, warp, and corrupt all of them, and so they came back at Melkor with furious anger. And this led to an event called the Battle of the Powers, also known as the War of the Gods. The Valar knew that this was the time to stop Melkor and his corruption over Middle-earth before it became too late to stop them, and so with their combined power and determination, they marched straight to Melkor and his forces. The Valar would leash the power that would destroy Utumno and lead to the capture of Melkor himself. He was taken unchained by Angainor, and sentenced to be imprisoned in the halls of Mandos indefinitely. However, the Valar did make a mistake here, for they did not push on to round up and wipe out all of the evil that Melkor had corrupted. Instead, they needed to recover. This meant that many of the evil creatures just went into hiding until their leader returned, and this even included Sauron. And so, for 3 ages Melkor remained in chains, and this was said to be around 2,900 years of equivalent time. After these many years, Melkor came to beg to Manwë for pardon. Although the thoughts of revenge were ever present in him, he pushed it aside to beg from his brother. Somehow Melkor was trusted here, at least to a certain degree, as Manwë granted Melkor what he asked. This was not a decision agreed with by all though, for the likes of Tolkien and Ulmo were very skeptical of this call. This meant that, despite the chains being removed, the Valar would not permit Melkor to leave their sight. However, this does not stop Melkor from making contact with the elves that lived here, as he already had a plan up his sleeve. This did not mean that the elves were all willing to listen to the words that came out of his mouth though. The group of the owls, known as the Vanyar, did not even humour him, as they did not possess an ounce of trust in this spirit. The Teleri were at the other end of the spectrum in that Melkor did not wish to waste his time with them, believing them to be too weak for his grand plans. However, the Noldor were just like that third bowl of porridge, just right. They had a greater wish for knowledge and skills, which meant their wishes were closer to that of Melkor's. And so, Melkor approached the one amongst them closest to himself, Feanor. Another powerful reason for Melkor to approach Feanor is that at this time, he was also creating the Silmarils, and Melkor desired these more greatly than anything else. Melkor would begin to weave his poisonous words into Feanor's mind, spreading rumours of the coming of men, raising doubts about the true wishes of the Valar, trying to turn them to his side. However, Melkor could not keep his meddling quiet enough, as Feanor began to realise that his lust was there for the Silmarils, and he rejected Melkor. And so his words ended up reaching the ears of Tolkien, who decides at once that Melkor needs to be returned to his chains. He cannot be trusted, he cannot be left to roam free. Melkor had seen this coming, and he fled south before he could be confronted. Melkor travelled to a land known as Avathar, southeast of Valinor, where he came across a dark creature who had once been allied to him, the spider-like spirit known as Ungoliant. Even though Ungoliant had previously rejected Melkor as his leader after he had been defeated, Melkor managed to convince Ungoliant to serve him once again with the offer of riches in return. Melkor wishes for both the Silmarils and to destroy what the Valar love, and so he uses Ungoliant for her ability to weave a cloak of shadow to hide them from the sight of the Valar. By this method, they manage to reach the 2 trees, and Melkor pierces them, draining them of their essence, with Ungoliant then drinking this sap to power herself. Once again, this leaves the world in darkness. In the confusion and the chaos that this creates, the two then travel north to Formenos, where Melkor steals the great jewels that are kept there, including the Silmarils. But not just this, Melkor also slays the first king of the Noldor, Finwë, as well. As the darkness still reigns over everything, Melkor and Ungoliant flee into Middle-earth by way of the icy passage known by the name of Halkorax, and by this route reach Melkor's stronghold of Angband. This is where a betrayal occurs, for Ungoliant wished to devour every single jewel to destroy all that they had taken. And although Melkor initially allows her to do this, he will not allow her to take the Silmarils as well. Melkor would struggle to defend himself though, for although Ungoliant was no Valar, all the evil acts that he had committed had taken great strength and energy from him, which had left him in a much weakened state. Whereas Ungoliant, she had been revitalized and swelled with power after drinking the sap of the trees, so she had become too much for even the greatest of the Valar in his current state. Ungoliant managed to trap Melkor in her webs and began to torture him up until the very close point of devouring him as well. However, Melkor screamed such terrible screams that it awoke the Balrogs that slept deep beneath Angband. These Balrogs, led by Gothmog the Lord of Balrogs, came to Melkor's rescue just in time and managed to drive Ungoliant away with their whips of fire. With Melkor now free of her webs and Ungoliant having ran far away, Melkor returns into Angband, and he would go on to create a great iron crown for himself that would house the 3 Silmarils that he had so greatly desired. Also, as an important point here, if we take a quick step backwards, when Melkor had stolen the great jewels in Forminos and killed Finwë, Feanor had cursed Melkor, naming him now Morgoth, which is the name that he was only called by from that point onwards by any of the Eldar, as they believed his Valar name of Melkor was no longer worthy of him, so their created name of Morgoth was more suited. And so, that is now how I shall refer to him for the remainder of his story. Morgoth has now settled back in Middle-earth, to the north of Beleriand in his rebuilt fortress of Angband, and he comes to learn that the lands in the rest of Beleriand have come to be settled by the elves during his time in chains. This irks Melkor. He cannot accept that the elves are free. He believes that they should be under his control, that they should be his slaves. So of course, he cannot just let them live here without interference. This is where the Wars of Beleriand would come to be. And I will say here, I do have a more complete video on the battles of the Wars of Beleriand if you would like to check that out in greater detail, but I will run over Morgoth's involvement in this war in broader strokes here. So, Morgoth's first plan in what becomes the first battle of the war is to send out his armies of orcs and cut off the elves of Eleuthingol and the Sindar in Doriath from Círdan and the Teleri in the Falas, which he succeeds in doing. However, out from the opposite side, Thingol manages to send a request of help to Denethor and the Nandor in Osiriand, who comes to his aid with an army of his green elves. These reinforcements make it too much for the orcs of Morgoth, so they retreat, but they are then utterly defeated in their retreat by the dwarves that appear from the Blue Mountains after they tried to return to Angband. Despite that loss for Morgoth, he was finding more joy from his orcs that were still attacking Círdan though, keeping him trapped. Next we get to the second battle of Dagor Nuin Gileath, or Battle Under Stars, and the return of Feanor in Morgoth's life. Feanor had brought a force of elves from Aman, who were a far greater foe than those elves who had stayed in Middle-earth, and they marched all the way to Thangorodrim, with the orcs unable to match these elves. When Feanor pushed on to the gates of Angband, he was separated from the main force by Morgoth's orcs. This is where Morgoth knew the time was right to send out his Balrogs led by Gothmog. Although Feanor put up a fight, and I mean a good fight too, he suffered too many wounds and was struck down by Gothmog. So although the war was not really going his way at this point, the achievement of killing Feanor was a softening factor to that. Then we have the Dagor Aglareb, or Glorious Battle. This third battle of the war involved the coming of Fingolfin to the war, like the second battle had with Feanor. He had also come over the icy passage Halcarax, with a certain Galadriel alongside him, as opposed to taking the ships like Feanor did. But the full reason for that being important is also one for another video, but let's just say it involves a kinslaying. So, now more Noldor have arrived, and Fingolfin has teamed up with Mithras, where they march in a great victory all the way up to the gates of Angband, trapping Melkor inside. This is where the siege of Angband begins by the elves. Despite their strength, the defense of Morgoth was far stronger. Morgoth was then stuck here for a great time, but he does not sit idly by and mope. No, he uses the extreme size of his underground realm to rebuild and improve. They are at a stalemate, but that is until Morgoth regains his strength and finally in time sets forth his dragons. Which is what now leads on to battle number 4, the Dagor Bragolak, or Battle of Sudden Flame. Morgoth sent forth the population of Angband, led by Glaurung the Dragon and Gothmog Lord of Balrogs. He also sent forth great rivers of fire onto the fields for his forces of dragons, Balrogs, orcs and other evil creatures to take the fight to the elves. This well and truly broke the siege of Angband. The strength and timing of this attack meant that the elves stood no chance. Morgoth not only broke the siege, but also now too controlled a great amount of the north of Beleriand with it. However, something happens next that Morgoth does not predict. The elf Fingolfin, the High King of the Noldor, rides to the gates of Angband alone to challenge the great Valar Morgoth in single combat. Even if there was amount of fear of death within Morgoth, he would also never truly believe a small child of Ilúvatar could ever best him, a Valar. So he meets Fingolfin, and this duel was one of legend. And on a personal note here, one that I would love to see a live action or animated version of at some point. So give me a like on this video if you agree with that. But anyway, Fingolfin managed to deal 7 separate wounds to Morgoth as he was powered by anger at what Morgoth had done to his kin. However, Morgoth was still too much for him. After all, he is one of the Valar. Morgoth managed to knock him to the ground on 3 separate occasions, but Fingolfin would rise from each of these knockdowns. Nonetheless, eventually it would become too much for him, and Morgoth would bring him down by the use of Grond, his hammer weapon and shield. With Morgoth about to crush Fingolfin under his foot, Fingolfin got one final stab into Morgoth's foot, which is said to have left him with a limp for the rest of his time. Just before Morgoth could deliver the final life-ending blow, snapping Fingolfin's neck, he is saved by the intervention of Thorondor, the greatest of the Eagles of Manwë, who struck Morgoth's face and carried the body of Fingolfin away. There would be 16 years before the 5th battle in the war, but this was not 16 years of nothing. One of the legendary stories of Middle-earth took place during these years, and that was the quest of Beren and Luthien. You had Beren of Beor's house in Doriath, and Luthien Tinuviel, who was the daughter of Eleuthingol and Melian the Maya. They would wish for this Silmaril, as that was the only way Thingol would believe Beren was worthy of his daughter's hand in marriage. So, together they disguise themselves and enter into Angband. However, the disguise is not great enough to hide them from Morgoth, who is aware of their presence, but allows them to appear before him, curious as to what their plan may be. As Morgoth planned just what to do with Luthien as she stood before him, he let her dance for him, and she managed to send him to sleep through the power of her song, very much something Morgoth did not predict. Beren then cut one of the Silmarils from Morgoth's crown as he lay there unconscious. However, the knife would break and stir Morgoth as the two then realised they must escape quick, which they managed to do, and this left Morgoth with just the remaining 2 Silmarils. Now a few more years on, Morgoth would reach the 5th battle of the Wars of Beleriand, the Nanaeth Anodiat, or the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. There are now men within Beleriand as well, and they choose now to try and team up to once and for all push Morgoth's evil out of their lands. However, Morgoth is no fool and is aware of their up-and-coming plan, and he too has brought men to his side, the ones known as Easterlings, which is basically just any of the men who lived to the east of the Blue Mountains during this time. Which means, for Morgoth's side, this gives them a great surprise attack from the side. Morgoth comes out the great winner of this battle of chaos and death, and any survivors on the side of good must flee to their remaining safe places, like that of the hidden city of Gondolin. And one man to mention from this battle though is that of Húrin, of who the stories of the children of Húrin are written after, for he is captured and taken alive back to Morgoth, who places him high upon Thangorodrim and curses him to watch his family, including of course his son Turin, who are also cursed, and Húrin is unable to do anything to help them and can only be forced to watch. There is also an elf to mention here too, a traitor elf called Maeglin. Thanks to the betrayal of Maeglin, Morgoth was able to discover the location of Gondolin, and so he laid siege to it, with Morgoth's forces being able to bring down this one last defense of the elves. This was not a flawless victory though, for Morgoth lost one of his mightiest servants of Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, by the hand of Ecthelion during this battle. And along with this too, another small group led by Glorfindel managed to escape, which would be so important in time as it included a certain 7-year-old child named Earendil, son of Idril, daughter of King Turgon of Gondolin, who had fallen with Gondolin, and Tuor of the House of Hador and brother of Húrin, as we previously mentioned a minute ago. But we will get back to why in a moment. Morgoth now feels confident, for despite losing Gothmog and one of the Silmarils, he now controls basically all of Beleriand, and still has the likes of Sauron at his side too. He is not exactly in a powerless state. However, that small child Earendil, some years later, believed to be when he was around 20 to 30 years old, went on an unheard of quest. He built a ship with the help of Círdan the shipwright, and he would name it Vingelote, and he would take this ship and set sail for the land of Aman. Now, for those of you who wonder what is so unheard of about this, it is that no man had ever set foot on this land. This land was for the divine spirits and the first children of Ilúvatar, no one else. However, with Earendil being half-elf, this is likely what made it at least a little bit acceptable for him to take this path, as well as him also having his path guided by the light of the Silmaril that Beren had previously cut from Morgoth's crown, and along with this too, as he had taken this quest on behalf of both elves and men as a representative, and not just on a selfish quest just for himself like others would attempt to do in the future. So, Earendil would appear in front of the Valar and begged them for their help. He says that without them Morgoth would win and everything would come under his control, willingly or as slaves. And so the Valar answer. They bring forth the host of the Valar, and that would include the likes of Valar, Vanyar and Noldor still in Valinor, and these would ride for Middle-earth. However, the Teleri would not join due to their feelings from the first Kingslaying that I very briefly mentioned upon earlier, as they still felt too strong feelings against the Noldor for their actions. It is believed that some of the Valar themselves may have come too, but there are never any clear indications whether that is true or not, but you think if you're going to challenge Morgoth, you're gonna need a few Valar on your side. This is where the final battle of the Wars of Beleriand takes place, the War of Wrath, or the Great Battle. The numbers that took part were too vast to count, and when the smoke settled at the end of it all, the hosts of the West came out on top. Earendil had killed the Great Dragon and Calagon the Black with the help of the Great Eagles. Nearly all the Balrogs were destroyed, and those that did survive hid themselves away far and deep. And the orcs stood no match themselves, so were basically all wiped out to the point that all Morgoth had left was Angband itself. However, with his power weakened too, and no defense left in front of him, this meant that the hosts made their way into the dungeons of Angband where Morgoth had hid himself, and they captured him. Morgoth knew he did not possess the strength to win this fight alone, so he attempted to negotiate for peace, but this time he was not humoured in any way. They hew his feet from his body, they cut the Silmarils from his crown, and once again that chain of Ungainor was to hold him as prisoner. This war had left Beleriand completely ruined and mostly sunk afterwards. The elves split themselves up either over Middle-earth to the east or back into Valinor. The men were given an island called Andor, later to be named Númenor, for their part in the fight against Morgoth. And the other men who fought with Morgoth ran as far east as they could. And then you also have the dwarves of the now ruined Nogoth and Belegoth, who also had to find new homes too. But then as for Morgoth himself, while bound in his old chain, he was sent through the Door of Night, beyond the walls of the world and into the timeless void. Here, in this everlasting and ancient darkness, Morgoth would be left to simply exist, but not be able to fully influence anything. And this is where the known story of Morgoth comes to its end. However, it is thought that this may not be the end of him entirely. He was not killed, so somehow, some way there was a possibility that he could return. It is believed in prophecy that there would one day be one last battle, best known as the Dagor Dagorath, or the Battle of All Battles, which had been prophesied by Mandos. It is said that this event would bring the true end to Morgoth at the end of it all. It is worth noting that Christopher Tolkien claimed that from his notes, J.R.R. Tolkien had abandoned the idea of the Dagor-Dagorath as a prophecy of Mandos, but it is still one many people know of. Regardless, it is said that Morgoth would be slain by Turin Turambar, the son of Húrin that Morgoth had cursed all that time before, but only after Morgoth had still managed to destroy nearly everything that existed, bringing the end to the world. That is when it is believed that a second Music of the Ainur would take place, this time without Melkor, and it would bring forth a new world free of evil and corruption. But really, who knows how that would really end up? Evil seems to always manage to rear its head one way or another, probably just through some other form. Or it becomes the idea of paradise, and in that new world, they just manage to live happily ever after. So there we have it, a look at the full story of the Dark Lord Melkor, later known as Morgoth. He is the one who is well considered as the big bad main enemy in all of Tolkien's works. After all, he is like the Lucifer of that world. He is a very interesting idea for a character too, as Eru claims that he knew Melkor's early thoughts. However, he did not intervene and stop him. Eru let Melkor go about his ways, corrupt all those things that he did, and did nothing about it. Very strange when you think that he was directly going against Eru's wishes. This could well hint though, that even though Melkor always wanted to show his power, rule over everything, bend everything to his will, he could never in a million years come close to Eru at all. Perhaps it comes back to that idea that no matter what, evil will appear, so if Eru knows about it, that's a safer thing than it somehow appearing from elsewhere. You don't really know. But there is one thing I do find quite sad about the story of Melkor though, and that is that we just don't get more detail of it. There are several instances where many years pass on by with nothing of note happening. There could be so much more from Tolkien's mind that sadly he never managed to put onto paper. Or it could just be that, actually as one of these divine spirits, time just means so little to him, so those long breaks of what appear as nothing happening is just perfectly normal to that kind of entity. It could be either way. But when you have an enemy like Melkor, you just want to hear more stories about it. But now that we have reached nearly the end of the video, I actually want to end all of this with a quote from the Children of Húrin's story, where Morgoth is talking to Húrin, as I feel this sums him up as a character quite nicely about how he felt towards the children of Ilúvatar and the world, with Húrin starting this quote. "Yet so it might be if they willed, for the elder king shall not be dethroned while Arda endures."
"You say it,"
said Morgoth.
"I am the elder king, Melkor, first and mightiest of all the Valar, who was before the world and made it. The shadow of my purpose lies upon Arda, and all that is in it bends slowly and surely to my will. But upon all whom you love my thoughts shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death."
Today we're diving deep into the shadowy depths of two of the most infamous places in Middle-earth history, Utumno and Angband, the strongholds of Morgoth himself. These were no mere castles. These places were pits of malice and despair, where unimaginable evils were born. Today, we'll uncover the dark history of these fortresses, what they meant for Middle-earth, and how they may even compare to the better-known land of Mordor. Now Melkor began the delving and building of a vast fortress deep under earth, beneath dark mountains where the beams of Iluin were cold and dim. That stronghold was named Utumno, and though the Valar knew naught of it as yet, nonetheless the evil of Melkor and the blight of his hatred flowed out thence, and the spring of Arda was marred. Green things fell sick and rotted, and rivers were choked with weeds and slime, and fens were made, rank and poisonous, the breeding place of flies, and forests grew dark and perilous, the haunts of fear, and beasts became monsters of horn and ivory, and died to the earth with blood. Let's kick things off with Utumno, Morgoth's first and greatest fortress, built after he entered Arda somewhere in the days before days between 3400 and 3450. It lay in the far northern reaches of Middle-earth, deep beneath the Iron Mountains, in a region so cold and desolate that the light of the Valar's 2 lamps barely reached it. Its pits and chambers extended so far beneath the earth that the Valar couldn't uncover all its secrets, even after its destruction. The blighted lands surrounding it remained desolate for ages, forever marred by Morgoth's corruption. So as you can see, Utumno wasn't just a fortress, it was the heart of Morgoth's corruption. Within its deep pits, Morgoth twisted life itself, creating countless dark and monstrous beings, including Balrogs, the twisted spirits of Maiar. Even more horrifying, Utumno is likely where Morgoth began his heinous work of corrupting elves into orcs. This fortress was the breeding ground for all of Morgoth's malice, his perversions of nature, and his rebellion against the Valar. Then there was Angband, originally built as an outlying defense for Utumno. Situated beneath the western end of the Iron Mountains, Angband was commanded by Sauron and designed as a buffer against any attacks from the Valar. But after the destruction of Utumno, Angband became Morgoth's primary fortress and the heart of his power. After that fall of Utumno, Morgoth raised Thangorodrim, 3 enormous volcanic peaks made of ash and poisonous gas above Angband's gates. These towering mountains were both a defensive measure and a symbol of Morgoth's overwhelming power, casting a shadow over the land of Beleriand. Utumno was vast, its labyrinthian tunnels reaching deep into the earth, while Angband, though similarly deep, was designed as a fortress of war. Both fortresses were nearly impenetrable, but served different purposes. Utumno was a place of corruption, and Angband was a military stronghold. Utumno was constructed around the year 3400 in the days before days, being those years before the years of the trees, as Morgoth's first fortress, as we've said, and this is where he really plotted his rebellion against the Valar. This was where his corruption of Arda began, spreading malice across the world and marring the spring of Arda. In the year 1090 of the Years of the Trees, the Valar under Manwë launched a decisive campaign to bring Morgoth to justice after they discovered his evil influence on the newly awakened elves. This led to the Battle of the Powers, a cataclysmic conflict fought across the northern regions of Middle-earth. The Valar were victorious, their forces driving Morgoth's armies back to Utumno. After 9 years of siege being between 1090 and 1099, the Valar broke the gates of Utumno, and Tolkas personally wrestled Morgoth, binding him with the Ainur chain. Morgoth's fortress was laid waste, its gates broken, but some of its deepest chambers remained hidden, sheltering his most loyal servants, such as Sauron and the Balrogs. This event also marked the beginning of the great journey of the elves, as they were summoned to Valinor to protect them from further evil. The Valar's victory over Morgoth was absolute, and Utumno was completely destroyed. While Utumno was Morgoth's original fortress, Angband rose to prominence after its fall. Angband had been built in the earliest days as a secondary fortress, commanded by Sauron. After Morgoth's defeat and imprisonment in Valinor for 3 ages, he returned to Middle-earth, reclaiming Angband as his seat of power. Morgoth raised the Thangorodrim above Angband, casting fear over all of Beleriand. From this fortress, Morgoth waged war against the elves during the First Age, unleashing orcs, balrogs, dragons, and other creatures of terror. Angband became infamous during the Siege of Angband, a 400-year-long period during which the Noldor surrounded the fortress, preventing Morgoth's forces from leaving. This siege was finally broken in 455 of the First Age during the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, when Morgoth unleashed rivers of fire, breaking the elves' line and setting much of Beleriand ablaze. Angband's final destruction came in the year 587 of the First Age, during the War of Wrath, when the Valar and their allies stormed the fortress. The Thangorodrim were destroyed, and Morgoth was finally captured and cast into the void, marking the end of his reign of terror. But with that all looked at, now let's compare these fortresses to a place that many of you may be more familiar with, Mordor. While Utumno and Angband were realms of unimaginable evil, they were very different from Mordor, the land of Sauron. Utumno, for example, was the birthplace of Morgoth's corruption, designed as a place to twist and pervert the natural world. It was more of a hidden lair, while Angband and Mordor were built as fortresses of war. Mordor, however, was much more strategically located. Mount Doom provided Sauron with the volcanic power to forge the One Ring, a resource Morgoth didn't need for his dominion. Angband's tower in Thangorodrim, though just as imposing as Mount Doom, was more of a defensive measure, creating a suffocating stronghold designed to crush all hope. After Utumno was destroyed by the Valar, it was impossible to rebuild. However, Sauron created his own dark domain in Mordor, shaping it into a kingdom of terror. In this sense, Utumno was about the birth of evil, while Angband and Mordor were about domination and warfare. And so, there you have it, two of the darkest and most terrifying places in all of Tolkien's legendarium, Utumno and Angband. These fortresses weren't just physical locations, they were manifestations of Morgoth's malice, shaping the evil that would plague Middle-earth for ages to come. Comparing them to Mordor, we see the evolution of evil in Middle-earth, from Morgoth's dominion of darkness to Sauron's era of war and control. While Morgoth's fortresses are long gone, their legacy and the fear they wrought still lingers in the stories of Middle-earth.
Morgoth is the true Dark Lord of Middle-earth. He is the one responsible for the majority of evil that exists across the lands, and throughout his time in Arda, pretty much all evil beings and creatures that were around served him. In today's video, we will be covering the most powerful of these servants. Some you will definitely know of, but there may be some that a few of you have not heard of. I have chosen to order this roughly by power, so we will begin with the weaker servants and move up to the most powerful. Let's start with orcs. Morgoth's army was made up of many dark creatures. He used his army to make war on the elves and men of Beleriand in the First Age. Just like Sauron, his main warriors were orcs, who were the primary foot soldiers that made up the majority of the massive army he had under his control. The orcs were bred by Melkor in mockery of the elves sometime during the Great Darkness. How exactly he did this is actually a little unclear. He did not have the ability to create life, only to corrupt what already existed. It is unknown whether corrupted elves, men, or other creatures were used to achieve this. The true power of orcs does not lie in their individual skill, but in their sheer number. In the First Age, hundreds of thousands of them were bred in Angband to be used in the wars of Beleriand. One of the biggest downfalls of these numerous warriors, however, is they have a tendency to spend as much time fighting with one another as they do fighting with men and elves. Moving on in the list of Morgoth's most powerful servants, we have trolls. Melkor created trolls before the First Age. They were very strong, and because of this, they weren't just used as simple warriors, but they were used to help build and carry machines of war. The biggest issue with these trolls were they turned into stone in the sunlight. Not only that, but they were, well, stupid. During the wars of Beleriand, Gothmog, the Lord of the Balrogs, had a bodyguard of trolls. During the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, in which Morgoth defeated the united armies of elves, men and dwarves, the great human warrior Húrin faced Gothmog's trolls to protect the retreat of the elven king Turgon. Morgoth's order to Gothmog to capture Húrin alive allowed Húrin to kill all of the trolls single-handedly. And it's partly for this reason that trolls weren't put higher on this list. Don't get me wrong, I certainly wouldn't want to fight one, but there have been a few instances throughout the history of Middle-earth where a mortal man or elf has taken down a single or even multiple trolls. Many trolls died in the War of Wrath, but some survived and of course were later recruited by Sauron for his wars. Next, I want to talk about one you're likely to know little to nothing about: vampires. Now, I'll be straight with you from the start of this. There is practically no information on vampires in Middle-earth available. Tolkien didn't give us any details on them. It seems he may just have chosen the word vampire for its modern connotations of bat-associated creatures or monsters. A similar instance is with the word werewolf, used by Tolkien again to denote wolf-like creatures, otherwise possibly unrelated entirely to a traditional werewolf. However, in context of the word vampire, Sauron did assume the form of such a creature numerous times. On one occasion, he flew over the forests, dripping blood from his throat. Furthermore, the only actual named vampire, Thuringwethiel, as her name connotes, was a woman of shadow. They may have been fallen Maya, similar to Balrogs, but we will never really know. We can assume, however, that these would be pretty dangerous, especially if a vampire was a form that Sauron would choose to take on occasion. Now, seeing as we just mentioned them in the previous section, let's talk about werewolves. Unlike werewolves of other literature, these did not transform from man into wolf at night, and their behaviour had no connection to the moon whatsoever. Therefore, the werewolves of Arda were not shapeshifters, and were always in the form of these great beasts. They were very similar to wolves and later wargs, but were as intelligent as man, meaning they were capable of negotiating and communicating with others. Karkaroth apparently had a venomous bite. It's unknown if this was a common trait of the species, or if it was just related to his status as the werewolf destined and designed to slay Juan. I don't want to expand too much on this story in particular, a tale from Beren and Luthien, but if you do want us to cover it, let us know in the comments down below. Okay, let's take this power scale up a notch. Balrogs. It's pretty common knowledge that the Balrogs were fallen Maya, those that were persuaded by Melkor to join his cause. In Arda, they took on the forms of fiery demons. It's pretty likely that Melkor actually used Balrogs as his personal bodyguards. At the time where Ungoliant attacked him, Melkor was, believe it or not, outmatched, and he let out a cry that brought the Balrogs from their slumber. They drove Ungoliant away, which should tell you that, especially in number, Balrogs are dangerous, and without a doubt, one of the more powerful servants of the Dark Lord. None of these were more powerful than Gothmog, the Lord of the Balrogs. He was a lieutenant in Morgoth's armies and pretty much had the same power in terms of control as Sauron, but we have a full video on him if you want the full details. Now let's talk about dragons. This is a pretty wide category because this can technically go from fire drakes and cold drakes all the way up to Ancalagon the Black. The origin of the dragons is somewhat a debated subject, though it's accepted that they were created by Morgoth in some sense. Not only were dragons big, powerful, and made of next to indestructible scales, but they were also fairly intelligent, making many of them extremely dangerous. We obviously see this with Smaug, and how easily he can basically defeat entire armies by himself just because he fancied himself some gold. But seeing as this is a video about Morgoth's most powerful servants, we may as well just talk about Ancalagon the Black. He was the largest winged dragon to ever exist in Middle-earth. Sadly, his time was limited to the War of Wrath, as that is where he made both his debut and his demise. But his entry to the battle sounds unimaginably epic. Facing final defeat, Morgoth unleashed his last and greatest weapon, a fleet of winged fire drakes led by Ancalagon. So terrible was their onslaught that the armies of the Valar were driven back from the gates of Angband, and their coming was said to have been accompanied by great thunder, lightning, and a tempest of fire. Despite only being around during the First Age, he was actually mentioned by Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. It has been said that dragonfire could melt and consume the Rings of Power, but there is not now any dragon left on Earth in which the old fire is hot enough, nor was there ever any dragon, not even Ancalagon the Black, who could have harmed the One Ring, the ruling ring, for that was made by Sauron himself. If you want to know more about dragons, we have a couple of videos on them that you can check out. Next we have the previously mentioned Ungoliant. I wasn't so sure whether or not to include Ungoliant because she isn't really a servant of Morgoth. She wasn't created by him and she did not serve his will. We know only that she came from darkness itself and was once an ally of Melkor. But because she worked with him, she was essentially doing what he wanted, whether or not she was doing it for her own motivations or not. I'm going to count it. If you need evidence on just how powerful Ungoliant is, just remember that Melkor sought out her help to attack Valinor and destroy the two trees. It's said that she was hesitant to join him because she feared the power of the Valar. All of them. Just think about that. Hesitated because she feared the Valar. Does that mean that she was more powerful than an individual member of the Valar? I would say yes, considerably. Let's fast forward to after Ungoliant devoured the gems that Morgoth stole from Formenos, where she grew to an even more monstrous size. She then demanded that Morgoth surrender to her the Silmarils. However, Morgoth refused, and so she attacked him. Weaving her dark webs, she attempted to cover him in her nets and take the Silmarils by force. Morgoth then gave out a terrible cry of pain, which, as mentioned earlier, led to his Balrogs coming to save him. So yeah, she took on one of the most powerful Valar by herself, so I would say it's safe to assume that she is one of the most dangerous and powerful beings, not only to serve or work for the Dark Lord, but to ever exist in all of Arda. Now, who could top this list above one of such power like Ungoliant? How about someone that almost conquered the entirety of Middle-earth after the fall of Morgoth? Sauron. Sauron's alliance with Morgoth is a strange one, because not only did he essentially idolize him, but also saw him as a way to further his own goals, as their ultimate ambitions were actually quite different. Sauron, initially going by Myron, saw in Melkor the will and power that would help him achieve his own goals and desires faster than if he pursued them by himself. However, while the rebel Valar wanted to either control or destroy Middle-earth, Myron's desire was to dominate the minds and wills of other creatures for what he perceived to be for their own benefit. To see his marvellous designs through, Myron sought to increase his innate power. So he was ensnared by Melkor, entering his following and soon becoming his main servant. After he allied himself with Morgoth, Myron maintained his appearance of being faithful to the Valar, but secretly fed Morgoth information about their dealings. It was only then when Morgoth established his strongholds in Middle-earth that Myron left Valinor and openly declared his allegiance, henceforth becoming a recognised foe of the Valar and the free peoples of Middle-earth. You will know the majority of the story from here. One more time, I don't want to be repeating information from previous videos over and over again, so we do have a pretty detailed video on Sauron that you can check out for a continuation of his story. Okay guys, that's pretty much it. Is there anyone I missed? Be sure to let me know who you would have included in the comments down below. We were recently asked to make a video about Morgoth's Ring of Power. At first I was a little confused until I remembered about volume 11 of the History of Middle-earth books is named Morgoth's Ring. Well, this title is actually a little deceiving. Morgoth did have a ring of sorts, but it's not what you may expect. So as I said, in today's video we will take on the subject of Morgoth's Ring, a metaphorical description that Tolkien once used to describe the whole of his fallen world. Just as Sauron concentrated his power in the One Ring, Morgoth dispersed his power into the very matter of Arda, thus the whole of Middle-earth was Morgoth's Ring. This is not meant to be taken literally, the notion of Morgoth having made a ring. The idea is one of like comparison. Sauron filled the ring with his power, his essence, and will to dominate all life. Morgoth, however, strove ever to make mockery and to mar the creation of the Valar to spite Eru Ilúvatar. The idea refers to the creation of evil and its persistence within the world of Middle-earth, and how the might of Morgoth was dispersed through his servants and the corrupt spirits who came to fight alongside him. Morgoth's might was so diminished through these labours of corruption and creation of evil. Examples like Glaurung, Father of Dragons, and Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, speak to how much of his own power went into these works, and into the persistence of evil throughout the history of Arda. This is what gives us the poetic comparison, that all of Middle-earth is Morgoth's ring. Sauron's relatively smaller power was concentrated, Morgoth's vast power was disseminated. The whole of Middle-earth was Morgoth's ring, though temporarily his attention was upon the northwest. Unless swiftly successful, war against him might end in reducing all Middle-earth to chaos, possibly even all of Arda. Melkor's constant efforts to mock and mar the works of the Valar led to a fundamentally corrupted world, one that is synonymous with the notion of a fallen world as it is understood in the Christian faith. Though we are not professional theologians, we know that Tolkien was influenced by the ideas of original sin, that humanity is fallen. That is to say, we do not live in the world as it was originally intended, and the temptations of Satan and the desires of men have brought low what would have been otherwise a better world. The insight we have into Tolkien's creative process portray a man who is deeply considerate of the underlying theological implications of his work, and a man who is deeply aware of eliminating any and all inconsistencies within it, if possible. The forging of the Silmarillion, it must be said, was a work that began long before The Hobbit, and was a work that underwent so much concentrated effort, starts and stops, that we must look at it as Tolkien's ring, the great labour of his life, and every bit as precious and brilliant a shining light as the great jewels of Fëanor. Throughout the volume, we learn of the numerous changes and attempts at changing the legendarium Tolkien made in the years between finishing The Two Towers and starting work on The Return of the King. What he wrote at that time we would come to know as the downfall of Númenor, but at the same time he was writing versions of his myth in which the world was never round, which seems to give us some insight at the real struggles of an author in their twilight years. Feeling the press of time against him and understanding the depth of the rewrites necessary to bring the Silmarillion's more fantastical and less realistic ideas into line with the tone of The Lord of the Rings. Some of the great ideas Tolkien would abandon in his earlier sketches, which include some of the most beautiful ideas we have from the Legendarium that might have been abandoned had Tolkien ever achieved his goals in life. One of the reasons he could never quite make it work was that the early mythology was more whimsical and less serious than it would come to be, and Melkor was more of a Loki figure than a satanic one. One example is that during the lighting of the Great Lamps, Melkor puts them on sticks of ice so that when they are lit, the ice melts and the world is again in darkness. He was the brother of Manwë, the trickster god, but not an explicit evil as he would evolve into in later editions. The volume also presents us with a completed text, the Athrobeth, the conversation between the mortal woman Andreth and Finrod Felagund on the differences between their people is fascinating. They discuss their differences, the difference of their lives, and most importantly, the different fate which awaited humanity, the potential for a second music, and the possibility that the fear of death is a remnant of Morgoth, part of his ring, so to speak. Andreth suggests that humanity was originally meant to live forever, but at some point this possibility was denied to us, which again reflects Tolkien's personal faith, the fall of man and our expulsion from Eden. Finrod believes that the gift of men and the gift of elves has always been different, and that one breeding envy on the other is the shadow of Morgoth playing on the human fear of the unknown. The History of Middle-earth book series allows us a look behind the curtain, a glimpse of the creative process behind the beloved stories we have all come to cherish. We learn what Tolkien thought of his work, how his ideas changed over time, and what we lost in the original publication of the Silmarillion. Some ideas were altered and others removed entirely, such as the exclusion of the children of the Valar, the Valarindri, or the two lamps which hung on either end of the world. We get a good look at where Tolkien's Legendarium remained shortly after he finished working on the Two Towers and before he started The Return of the King. The moment of marriage between his older mythology and later stories, like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, came early on, in the Fellowship of the Ring. It's not a major story point perhaps, and it takes place when Aragorn, still under the guise of Strider, has encamped with the four hobbits on Weathertop, with ringwraiths approaching unseen. Strider says, "I will tell you the tale of Tinuviel, for it is a long tale of which the end is not known, and there are none now except Elrond that remember it aright as it was told of old. It is a fair tale, though it is said, as are all the tales of Middle-earth, and yet it may lift up your hearts." This is more than just a hint at Strider's true identity. It is a moment where Tolkien's earlier sketch mythology became the mythic history of Middle-earth. What we are presented with in Morgoth's Ring, as Volume 10 of the History of Middle-earth, is meant as an explanation, a glimpse at where the good professor was in his work and what remained to him. He would spend his remaining years trying to finish the Silmarillion in a way that would be consistent with the Lord of the Rings in all instances, but he was caught up with what his son Christopher called the underlying metaphysical and theological postulates, which underpinned his mythology. In Tolkien's mind, the free-flowing myth of decades prior was no longer mature enough, nor realistic enough to pass for a true history for his created world. It may be that he came to perceive from such experimental writing as this text that the old structure was too comprehensive, too interlocked in its parts, indeed in its roots too deep, to withstand such a devastating surgery. In conclusion, the ring being referred to in the title is metaphorical, and it means to be a comparison to the way Sauron forged the ring by putting all his evil and his will inside it, to corrupt those who used and those who engaged in it. There was no actual ring. The diminishment of Morgoth's power by the time he duelled with Fingolfin had seen him pass from what was once nearly a god to being able to be wounded by an Noldorin elf. That is how greatly the world of Arda was marred and imbued by the dreadful will and purpose of Morgoth, making all of Arda Morgoth's ring. Melkor, in accomplishing his desire to mock the creation of Eru and the other Valar, had his powers so dispersed that the fields of Arda, each dark place and deep dungeon, all contained the touch of evil left by Morgoth in his continuous efforts to ruin and mock creation, the gods, and Eru himself.
Imagine a world where the very essence of creation is challenged by one being's refusal to accept his place in the cosmic order. This isn't just any tale, it's a journey into the heart of Tolkien's Legendarium, where the stakes are as high as the creation of the world itself. Melkor's tale is one of ambition, envy, and a series of catastrophic mistakes. It's a story that resonates because, at its core, it's about the consequences of our choices and the paths that we decide to walk. From the high halls of Valinor to the deepest dungeons of Angband, Melkor's journey is a cautionary tale about what happens when power is sought for its own sake and the natural order is defied. But what was Melkor's greatest mistake? Was it his insatiable hunger for power, his disdain for life, or perhaps his underestimation of those he sought to dominate? His journey isn't just about the battles fought in the physical world, it's a profound narrative about the battles within, the struggle between creation and destruction, and the power of wills clashing in the quest for dominion. So, grab your cloaks, fellow adventurers, as we embark on this journey together, exploring the depths of Melkor's ambitions and the ripples they create across Middle-earth. It's a tale that teaches us, warns us, and ultimately invites us to reflect on the nature of power and responsibility. Let's begin. In the beginning, there was harmony, but as in any great story, conflict arises. Melkor, gifted with incredible power and knowledge, begins his descent not with a step, but a misstep, a fundamental misunderstanding of his own role in the universe. Imagine being told you're part of an orchestra, yet you yearn to be the sole composer. This was Melkor's plight. He couldn't stand being one of many. His desire to shape the world solely in his image, to be not just a creator, but the creator. But here's the thing. Melkor was incapable of creating life, only able to twist and mar what already existed. J.R.R. Tolkien in the History of Middle-earth series illuminates this flaw, saying, his sole ultimate object was their destruction. He could not annihilate them, that is, destroy their being. It is a poignant moment of realization. Melkor, for all of his might, could not create as Eru did. His envy turned to spite, aiming to corrupt everything beautiful and pure. Orcs, trolls, dragons, monsters born from his malice, a testament to his failure to create. What we see here is not just a tale of villainy, but a tragedy of cosmic proportions. A being of immense power, unable to fulfill his deepest desire, turns to destruction as his only means of expression. It is a lesson on the dangers of envy and the corruption it breeds. Now, I want you to think. How often have we seen the desire to dominate, to be the sole architect of our world, lead to downfall? Melkor's identity crisis, his refusal to accept his role, sets the stage for every mistake that follows. But Melkor's story doesn't end with envy. His mistakes compound, leading to tactical errors in his quest for dominion. As we venture further into this tale, let's explore how his actions in the Wars of Beleriand reveal a pattern of miscalculations and misjudgments. War. War never changes. In Middle-earth, Melkor's relentless pursuit of dominance brings him into constant conflict with the Valar, elves, and men. His love for cruelty and torture, though a part of his dark character, becomes one of his greatest vulnerabilities. Consider this. Melkor's decision to imprison Hurin rather than killing him outright. It might seem as a minor choice in the grand scheme, but it is a glaring example of wasted resources and lost opportunities. Every leader knows the cost of such missteps. For those of you craving more gritty details though on Melkor's battles, why not keep an eye on other videos on the channels? We do have a video on the full story of Melkor, and there's that treasure trove of stories waiting there for you. But anyway, his sole ultimate object was their destruction. That's what Tolkien writes, shedding light on Melkor's rage against those who dared exist beyond his control. This intolerance, this rage, it didn't just isolate him, it blinded him to the strength and determination of his enemies. In understanding the elves and dwarves, in overlooking the lesser evils he allied with, Melkor's hubris set him on a path to failure. His armies, overcommitted and ill-prepared for the ambushes that lay ahead, suffered attrition that strained his resources to the breaking point. And so, we see a pattern emerge, a cycle of overconfidence, miscalculation, and tactical oversight. Melkor's inability to learn from his mistakes, to adapt and evolve, cemented his fate, paving the way for his eventual downfall. In the grand chessboard of Middle-earth, Melkor played a game of power and dominion, yet it was his own moves, blinded by cruelty and arrogance, that led him to checkmate. His story serves as a stark reminder of the perils of underestimating one's adversaries and the cost of failing to recognize the value of strategy over brute force. As we delve deeper into the tale of Middle-earth's first Dark Lord, let's now turn our gaze to specific moments that sealed Malkor's fate. The tale of Beren and Luthien not only showcases his underestimation of the lesser beings, but also marks a pivotal turning point in his downfall. In the heart of the forest, where shadows dance with light, begins the tale of Beren and Luthien, a story that challenges the might of Malkor. It's here, in this unexpected confrontation, that we see the Dark Lord's greatest vulnerabilities exposed. Picture this: Luthien, with a power and beauty that defies description, confronting Malkor in his own domain. Her song, a melody of such surpassing loveliness and blinding power, ensnares Malkor, casting a spell of blindness and confusion upon him. In this moment, Malkor's court falls into slumber, the fires fade, and the very crown on his head, laden with silmarils, becomes a burden too heavy to bear. Overwhelmed by Luthien's magic, Malkor is toppled, his iron crown rolling away as a symbol of his defeat. The loss of a Silmaril to Beren and Luthien was not just a defeat, it was the beginning of the end for Malkor. That very jewel, later bound upon Earendel's brow, would light the path for the Valar, leading to Malkor's ultimate downfall. And so, we witness the War of Wrath, a cataclysmic conflict that reshapes the very fabric of Middle-earth. The Valar, once hesitant, now intervene directly, their might overwhelming Malkor's forces, breaking his pits and strongholds, and finally capturing the Dark Lord himself. In the end, Malkor is bound with the chain of Ainur, his crown shattered, and the remaining Silmarils taken. His final exile through the Door of Night signifies not just his defeat but a profound loss. A being of immense power, reduced to a whisper in the annals of history. The tale of Beren and Luthien against Malkor is more than a story of victory and loss. It's a testament to the power of love, the strength of the underestimated, and the inevitable downfall of those who cannot see beyond their own pride and ambition. As we draw closer to the conclusion of Malkor's tale, let us reflect on the deeper undercurrents of his character. His nihilism, his inability to create or love, and his refusal to accept the world and its inhabitants mark the essence of his downfall. In the vast world of Middle-earth, Malkor's story is a dark thread woven through the fabric of creation. His journey brings us to a pivotal aspect of his nature: nihilism. It's not just his actions that define him, but his profound emptiness and inability to appreciate creation. Imagine standing at the edge of a magnificent forest, seeing only the timber for a fire, not the beauty of the trees. This was Malkor's vision of Arda, a place not of wonder, but of resources to be exploited and wills to be broken. Tolkien gives us a window into Malkor's despair. Or he became so far advanced in lying that he lied even to himself, pretending he could destroy them and rid Arda of them altogether. Malkor's lies to himself reveal a deeper tragedy: his refusal to see the world and its inhabitants as anything more than obstacles to his dominion. His creations, if one could call them that, were corruptions, perversions of existing life, born from his spite and envy. Unlike the Valar, elves and men who could still find beauty in Arda Mard, Malkor could only rage against it, seeking to level everything into chaos. In his heart, Malkor knew the truth. He could never annihilate the essence of Arda, for it existed beyond his influence, a testament to the creative will of Eru Ilúvatar. His attempts to dominate and destroy only led him further into despair, his power diluted, his spirit fractured. Malkor's greatest failure was his refusal to acknowledge the world as it was, a place of diversity and complexity, not for him to dominate but to coexist with. His inability to accept this sealed his fate, leaving him a cautionary tale of what becomes of those who see the world through a lens of fear, envy, and hatred. as we reflect on Melkor's journey from his first discordant note in the music of the Ainur to his ultimate exile into the void, we're reminded of the themes of creation and destruction, power and humility, and the importance of seeing beauty in the world and its inhabitants. So there we have it. As we stand at the threshold of understanding, looking back at the tumultuous saga of Melkor, Middle-earth's first Dark Lord, we're left with a story of tales that speak of much more than battles and betrayals. They whisper to us about the resilience of spirit and the power of unity in the face of overwhelming darkness. Through the lens of Melkor's ambitions and errors, we've traversed a landscape that's both fantastical and deeply human. His story, marked by a refusal to accept the world and its myriad forms of beauty, offers us a mirror, reflecting our own struggles with pride, envy, and the desire for control. But perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in the aftermath of Melkor's fall, the enduring legacy of creation over destruction. Tolkien's world, with its deep scars and boundless beauty, reminds us that even in the wake of great turmoil, life finds a way to blossom anew. Like the light of the Silmarils, the stories of Middle-earth shine brightly in the shadow of Melkor's ambition, guiding us towards understanding, empathy, and the recognition of our shared humanity. They teach us that true strength lies not in dominion or power, but in the courage to love, to create, and to stand united in the face of adversity. At the end of the day, Melkor's tale is a cautionary one. A reminder of the futility of seeking to bend the world to one's will, ignoring the intricate beauty of its natural order. It's a story that transcends the boundaries of Middle-earth, urging us to look beyond our desires, to cherish the world we inhabit, and to foster the sparks of creativity and kindness within us.
We have the Valar who went against Eru on one hand, Morgoth, and his most loyal of servants on the other, Sauron. It is said that each is the strongest of their respective race. But what does this mean when compared to each other? We will look at the comparative damage to the peoples of Arda, concerning ourselves with all of the death and the scars, real and figurative, to follow wars, the sacking and pillaging of cities, the eruption of Erodurin, and the choking smoke of each of the Dark Lord's engines of war. So, let's dive into it. The difference between Sauron and Melkor is a vast one in terms of personality. Melkor is essentially a nihilist, happy to be able to undo the works of the Valar to try to spite them. He wants the powers and gifts of Eru, nothing else, and the fact that he cannot have them makes him furious. This goes all the way back to the early framework of the Silmarillion, when Melkor was still Melko, and how Melko plunged the world into darkness by destroying the two lamps in the earliest days of Arda. At that time, he was more of a trickster god akin to Loki than an outright satanic figure, but the degrees he would go to just to spite his creator was seemingly unending. When he smote the lamps, the world was plunged into darkness. In the published Silmarillion, he and Ungoliant would make war on Valinor, and the Great Spider would suck the sap from Telperion and Lorelin, swelling with power to a fearful size. So much so that she would become more terrible than Morgoth for a time, and were it not for a world-piercing scream that brought forth his Balrogs, it is possible that Ungoliant might have devoured the Dark Lord himself. But this shows the levels Morgoth was willing to go to side with such a being, to cover the world in such darkness, all to go against what his father, brothers and sisters had been at hand to create. If it is not his, he wants it gone, wiped out, forgotten. Sauron, despite once being of the choir of angels like Melkor, but of a lower level, he was known as Myron. He was still an immortal spirit who was in attendance at the Ainur Dale, wherein Eru Ilúvatar and the Ainur sang three great themes of music and so brought the world into being, with Melkor of course trying to sing his own song against it. Although at this time Myron was a student of Aule, not Melkor. Sauron was in many ways opposite in temperament to Melkor. First he became a traitor to Aule the Smith. When he turned coat and joined the ranks of Melkor, he delighted in cruelty and the inflicting of fear on his prisoners, delighting in the psychological torture of them. But perhaps for Sauron, it's not quite as black and white. His motivations really all came back to order, to have things ran the way he wanted them, and in the end, thinking that the best way to get things done was simply just to do it himself. While Sauron was tyrannical in his desire to order the world as he saw fit, Morgoth was glad just to destroy everything his brethren, the Valar, had created. Now, while Sauron made more for the sake of dominion and control, Morgoth made war for the disruption it brought to the lives of the children of Ilúvatar, as he hated and feared all of creation, and was truly a sadist at heart. Keep in mind for the moment when the location of Gondolin is betrayed after nearly 5 centuries, and prior to its destruction, Morgoth laughs. He laughs at the wanderer who stumbled to the bridge and attempted to get back in. He laughs at the thought of the misery to come. When Beren and Luthien made their way into his fell throne room to pry a Silmaril from his iron crown, we get the impression of what vile thoughts are running through the Dark Lord's mind when Luthien sings a song of power, hypnotizing him long enough for Beren to loosen one of the Silmarils from the crown. His thoughts are vile, and it is clear that he is thinking of taking her against her will, while Sauron is never presented in the text to think in quite that way, so a point to Morgoth for being that more despicable. To give some structure to the next segment, we will look at the essentials of what it means to be a Dark Lord within Middle-earth. There are no mortals, not even the likes of Ar-Pharazôn, that can really do much to approach the greater powers that inhabit the world. Which we must remember, the world that is Arda is alive with spirits, living aspects of a conscious and active nature, a consciousness of will and purpose that acts through nature and all things, and is the most miraculous magic of all, the Song of Eru himself. The world is rich and elaborate beyond words, and the patterns of Melkor's rebellion, which set the stage for ages of misery, conflict, and anguish. But to be a Dark Lord and wield power, first you must have to build your base, your Angband, your Barad-dûr, and each had one of special magnificence. Though each did have an impossibly massive fortress, Morgoth kept his own council in Angband, and Sauron in Barad-dûr. The size of Angband was many degrees larger in size. The difference between the Valar and the Maiar are really difficult to tease out, as both of them are more powerful than the mightiest of elves and humans in Middle-earth. We have instances where Melkor is able to hold back the entirety of the host of Valinor at one moment, and, in another, after the Battle of Sudden Flame, is able to be wounded by Fingolfin. What happened to Melkor is that since he was never actually able to give life or create life, he had to disperse his powers into the fell beasts he would create, such as the likes of Glaurung, father of dragons. From the amount of willpower and his own essence that he poured into the disruption of the plans of the Valar, he was made lesser than he had been. But the despoiling of the world is what makes Melkor more terrible than Sauron, though it could be argued that Sauron caused equivalent levels of misery. That is to say, the very ground is infused with the evil of Melkor, and the world of Arda became Morgoth's ring due to the degree he expended his fell powers into creating and maintaining dominion over others. Throughout the wars of Morgoth of Beleriand to the Dagor Aglareb, Dagor Bragollach, Dagor Nuin Gileath, and the War of Wrath, Morgoth's deeds would bring Beleriand beneath the waves. Throughout every Dagor or battle, the untold suffering that came of Morgoth's incitement of distress among the Noldor elves is just that, untold, and the tears, as said, unnumbered. Of the crimes of Morgoth, the corruption of the proudest and most skillful elf to ever live, Fëanor himself must be remembered. Through him and his 7 sons there would be carnage unthinkable in Middle-earth. And all the deaths, maimings, and scars, both seen and unseen, would last long into the future, far after Morgoth was finally destroyed and thrown into the void. However, saying this, it took the hosts of the Valar themselves to finally bring him down. He was too powerful, his armies too great for any children of Ilúvatar to truly best him. After putting so much of himself into his darkened minions, the collective might of his brothers and sisters was too much for even the greatest of the Valar to overcome. Whereas with Sauron, his need for desperate order saw him first take control over most of Middle-earth, pushing back all the elves to Lindon and refugees gathered at Imladris. He also chipped away at Gondor for a long time too. He was okay with playing the long game, waiting, planning. He was a tactician. However, when it came down to those final battles, he was never quite the powerhouse that Morgoth was. He was wiped out by Númenor's fleet, and years later submitted to Ar-Pharazôn of Númenor's army as well. Albeit that was more tactical, despite him knowing he wouldn't have won the battle. Then again, at the end of the Second Age, after the years of planning that took place at Imladris, the High King of Men, Elendil, took long counsel with the last remaining High King of the Noldor, Gil-galad. They built up their forces to go to what would become the War of the Last Alliance, in which both Gil-galad and the High King Elendil would lose their lives in throwing down Sauron himself, being bested by a singular elf and a mortal. Although despite being thrown down, his spirit would remain there, cruelly lingering for centuries afterwards, even as he regathered his strength and rebuilt the Tower of Barad-dûr. It was as though he could sit back and control a war, but as soon as it truly mattered, to swing that final blow, he kept coming unstuck. An interesting topic to think of could be looking at whether there was a point that Sauron was actually more powerful than Morgoth. Sauron's power in the Second Age compared to Morgoth at the end of the First Could well be that time if there ever truly was one. So if you'd like a video dedicated to that topic, please leave us a comment of Sauron the Great, Morgoth the Weak. And if there's enough interest, that will get put onto the list of to-do videos for all of you here. So there we have it. It's hard to say that one Dark Lord is more or less evil than the other. The most that can be said is that both are embodiments of the worst traits to be found in bad guys within Tolkien's Legendarium. The traits of pride, boundless ambition, and the will to dominate all life never ends well for these characters. Self-seeking might as well as a death sentence for a villainous character dwelling in Middle-earth. Melkor was once a being of high majesty whose pride and ambition to mark all things with his dark mark would see him brought low, turning the whole of Arda itself into Morgoth's ring, in which the very creation of the world was ruined and sullied but for the efforts of a single arrogant voice, who, like a boastful child, continued to shout out, "Look at me." Both Dark Lords had allies and used orcs and fell beasts to enforce their will on others, and each would fill the world with evil. Morgoth with the very soil and nature of the world, as Sauron does with the One Ring. To compare one to the other, in the end, comes down to picking the worst of two awful things. There may be no true way to solve questions of what is eviler, or unforgivable, when it comes to the end of the greater Dark Lord. Everything that Sauron did came from the setup of Morgoth. He was the originator. He started it all. So although Sauron did many great things, evil, yes, but great in a way. None of those would ever have been possible without the foundations laid by Morgoth first.
Is Sauron greater than Morgoth? Could one of the Maiar possibly be greater than one of the Valar? Did Sauron really succeed where Morgoth could not? Today's video is going to be a big one because we're tackling a question that's been on the minds of Tolkien fans for years. Who is truly the greatest evil in Middle-earth, Sauron or Morgoth? But it's not just a matter of raw power here. We're going to dive into the nitty-gritty of their successes and failures and figure out just what made Sauron's strategies work where Morgoth's fell short. Of the many deadly foes faced by Professor Tolkien's heroes throughout the breadth of his legendarium, fans have long debated the differences between the two Dark Lords, Morgoth and Sauron respectively, not only looking at their similarities and differences, but how they went about their evil schemes in unique ways unique to their characters. We can learn much from their character by their actions. Sauron was able to remain patient for centuries, drawing all evil to him and bide his time, striking out at that proper moment. But did this really make him the superior force, and maybe more evil than his master? Well, let's take a look at this together. Prior to the War of the Last Alliance, which spanned decades and had 4 distinct phases before the Siege of Barad-dûr, a council of war was held atop Amon Sul. There the leaders of the war parties, Elendil and his co-counsel Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, strategized and discussed tactics before embarking on what would become the War of the Last Alliance. The film adaptation may give the impression that this war that brought about Sauron's downfall took place over a long afternoon, but the book depicts a long and grueling 12-year war, a significantly longer timeframe. Sauron proved to be a formidable foe, and the fear of his possible return was enough to demonstrate that even the mightiest and wisest of Middle-earth's peoples had reason to fear. Looking to Morgoth, he possessed great cunning and strategic thinking, but his inner hatred for his foes often drove him to act recklessly, resulting in negative consequences for his own campaign. He frequently placed himself in harm's way, while Sauron would never make such a mistake. This leads to the main point of the argument. Morgoth, as a member of the Valar, holds a higher rank than the Maiar, Sauron, but one's strength is not solely determined by their might. Sauron's intelligence, cunning, and ability to anticipate and preempt his enemies is what sets him apart. Consider the ring's influence, which is subtle, corrosive, and often goes unnoticed until it is too late. Sauron's plan for the Rings of Power centers around the ring's ability to access the mind of the ring-bearer. Rather than engaging in traditional warfare, he seeks to gain control over the enemy's mind first. This strategy was evident in his approach to the host of Ar-Pharazôn, where he played the long game. Sauron allowed himself to be captured and taken to Numenor in chains, gradually manipulating his way onto the Privy Council of the King, similar to the way Wormtongue's manipulation of King Theoden worked. So, through his cunning and influence, Sauron gained significant control over Numenor's affairs by following this route. His actions were those of persuasion, acts which led his enemy into their own ruin by playing on their emotion, pride, and natural desires. He was able to bend Ar-Pharazôn to his will because he and the king ultimately had the same goal, although Sauron had goals which he kept hidden from the king. The destruction of his own lands, which he was able to foresee as he would have been well aware of the ban of the Valar. This ability to foresee the future was a unique advantage that even Morgoth lacked. Additionally, Sauron was able to prevent the Valar from intervening on behalf of the free peoples of Middle-earth, a feat that Morgoth could not achieve. The reasons why the Valar did not act against Sauron and the War of the Ring have been discussed previously, and you can find the link to that video in the information below this one. Morgoth waged a series of destructive wars himself though, although he was occasionally pushed back. His primary goal was to cause chaos, undermine the Valar, and expand his dominion, but really, above everything, he sought to defy his former brethren among the Valar. If they raised a mountain, he turned it into a valley. If they filled the world with light, he would cover it in darkness. In his most infamous attack, he and his accomplice Ungoliant darkened the realm of Valinor by attacking the two trees, Talperion and Laurelin. Morgoth's recklessness led to Ungoliant grow into such a size that he was unable to confront her, and he would likely have become her dinner if not for his piercing scream that summoned a group of Balrogs to his last-minute rescue. In contrast, Sauron had a different relationship with one of Ungoliant's offspring, Shelob, whom he sought to pacify rather than antagonize. It has been said that Sauron thought of Shelob more like a lot of people would think of a cat. Morgoth's hatred prevented him from exhibiting the same level of patience, planning, and subtlety of evil as Sauron did. If you want to delve deeper into this subject, we have a dedicated video on how Sauron makes war, exploring how he implemented strategic terrorism, turned populations against each other, and targeted his enemy strongholds when they were weakest and divided. So again, the link will be in the description below if you would like to check that out. But anyway, Morgoth's ego blinded him to the point that he gradually weakened his own powers through the dispersion of his perverse creations, including the likes of Glaurung, Lord of Dragons, and all the creatures that fought on his side during the War of Wrath. Each of them was animated by his power, leading to the expenditure of an enormous amount of energy. This explains why he was once able to fend off the entire Valar army by himself, but then later, why he was wounded by Fingolfin's mighty spear, Ringel, which left him with a permanent limp after that time. Morgoth's judgment was often clouded by impatience and hatred, leading him to take risks and make unwise decisions. His overconfidence in his own power made him more prone to such mistakes compared to Sauron, who compensated for his lack of physical strength with exceptional intelligence, patience, and cunning. Sauron's strategic thinking and manipulative tactics are unparalleled in fiction, past or present. As we have previously demonstrated, while Morgoth reveled in chaos as a tyrant, Sauron's approach to tyranny was different. He sought a specific kind of order, his own kind, and was willing to subjugate the world to achieve what he believed was best for the people of Middle-earth. Each of the Dark Lords had a distinct approach to evil. Sauron was the cunning and patient creature who utilized deception, terrorism, and cunning to subjugate his enemies. Morgoth, on the other hand, relied more on brute force to achieve his mysterious goals, despite his claims of dominion over Arda. Sauron was more cautious and willing to conceal his true nature, a feat that Morgoth seemed either unwilling or unable to achieve. Ultimately, Sauron proved to be the more effective Dark Lord, since he did not risk provoking the Valar into the fight and relied on intelligent tactics rather than raw power. Another important aspect of Sauron's success was his willingness to delegate and let others of strength, such as the likes of Saruman, into his plans to an extent. He makes use of others in a way that Morgoth appeared incapable. As for those who turned the tide in the Neneth Anodiad, the traitors whom Morgoth was able to manipulate were rewarded the same way as all of Morgoth's collaborators were rewarded. We can tell you one thing, very few of them could be described as being treated like a pet. They were treated like kindling, the fuel for Morgoth's own engine of war, and their sacrifices and moral dilemmas were of no matter to Morgoth himself. He was a god, with a capital G, and was entitled to all he could take from the people, and all that people gave was his right. Saying that, Sauron was a narcissist as well, but it is likely he learned from his master's mistakes that one should not bite off the hand that is currently feeding them. Both Sauron and Morgoth would fail for similar but different reasons, and both of those ultimately came down to the way they treated their allies, the way they pushed beyond what was possible for them to maintain, and their never-ending search to dominate the indomitable will of the free peoples of Middle-earth, a people whom both of these tyrants continued to underestimate to their ultimate peril. So there we have it. While Morgoth was a mighty and powerful being, his hatred and impatience often led to unwise decisions and risky moves. Sauron, on the other hand, lacked the physical might that Morgoth did, but he made up for it with intelligence, patience, and cunning. His strategic thinking and manipulative tactics were unparalleled, allowing him to control his enemies' minds and bend them to his will. Morgoth may have held a higher rank among the Valar, but it is Sauron's ability that sets him apart and makes him the ultimate villain of Middle-earth.
The Great Deceiver has returned to Middle-earth.
Have you ever wondered if the greatest evils to ever haunt Middle-earth could return? In the grand mythology of Middle-earth, there are two great evils. One, Morgoth, the original Dark Lord, and his servant turned successor, Sauron. But this brings up one tantalizing and ominous question really. Could Sauron resurrect Morgoth? Morgoth, originally named Melkor, was the strongest of the Ainur and the first to turn to darkness and become that first Dark Lord. He was the reason that much darkness and evil ever made its way into Middle-earth in the first place. His reign of terror culminated in the War of Wrath, where he was ultimately defeated by the combined might of the Valar and exiled from the world, ending the First Age. Just imagine the Siege of Angband, the last fortress of Morgoth, the Valar leading a host of elves and men. The sky lights with the clash of divine powers as Morgoth's dark realm crumbles under the relentless assault, culminating in his capture and banishment. His removal brought a temporary peace, but the shadow of his malice lingered. In the ensuing power vacuum, Sauron, once a servant of the Valar Aule and a Maya of great power himself, emerged as a new dark force when he was taken in by Morgoth. Initially less evil than his master, Sauron's ambition and cunning soon led him down a similar path of domination and ruin. His rise was marked by the forging of the Rings of Power and the ensnaring of Middle-earth's leaders, setting the stage for centuries of strife. The legacies of Morgoth and Sauron are deeply intertwined with the fate of Middle-earth. Morgoth's fall led to the reshaping of the world, and his pervasive evil influenced the land and its inhabitants long after his banishment. Sauron's ascendance brought new forms of deception and war, furthering the discord sown by Morgoth. Together, their actions and the reactions they incited shaped the history, cultures, and very geography of Tolkien's world.
One ring to rule them all.
The likelihood of Sauron ever actually bringing Morgoth back, trying to resurrect him, is actually quite a complex question. The Valar, after a hard-fought battle against Morgoth, actually managed to defeat him, tie him up, send him through the doors of night into the timeless void, an action endorsed by Eru Ilúvatar, the creator of all. Such a profound judgment by the highest powers in Tolkien's universe suggests a near impossibility of Morgoth's return by any lesser being's hands, including Sauron's. Imagine a Middle-earth under the shadow of a resurrected Morgoth. The skies darken, the earth trembles, and ancient evils stir. The The peoples of Middle-earth, from the legendary elves to the men in their kingdoms, look into the horizon with a mix of fear and resolve. The forces of good marshaled together for an unimaginable war. The desperate alliances and epic battles that would ensue would be ones of legend. However, in the realm of theoretical discussion, and given Sauron's title as the Necromancer, one might ponder the extent of his power. Sauron was a Maya, a being of immense might and knowledge, yet his power was significantly less than Morgoth's. The lore does indicate that beings in Tolkien's universe can return from death, as evidenced by Beren and Luthien, who were granted a second life by the Valar, and Gandalf, who was sent back in a more powerful version of his form by Eru Ilúvatar as Gandalf the White, with those enhanced powers and purpose. These instances of resurrection were, however, under the direct influence or allowance of higher authorities and for purposes that aligned with the overall balance and correction of the world. In the case of Morgoth, his essence was so interwoven with the very matter of Arda and his evil so profound that his return would likely require an upheaval or allowance of cosmic proportions. It seems more plausible that Sauron, in his pursuit of dominion, might aspire to or feign the resurrection of Morgoth as a means of instilling fear or commanding loyalty, rather than achieve an actual return of the Dark Lord.
And he does not share power.
When you think about it, Morgoth and Sauron, although both being Dark Lords, had very different methods and ways of going about things during their reigns. Morgoth, or originally Melkor, desired to dominate and destroy out of a twisted envy and a wish to corrupt all of creation. His was a path of nihilism, seeking to mar everything that was not under his direct control. He wanted not just to rule over Middle-earth, but to reshape it entirely to his will, or failing that, to obliterate it. Morgoth's nihilism and envy are epitomized in his obsession with the Silmarils, those jewels of purest light created by the skilled elf craftsman Fëanor. These radiant gems, imbued with the light of the two trees of Valinor, represented all that was beautiful and untainted in the world. Yet, it was their beauty and the reverence they received that kindled a dark and consuming greed in Morgoth. His desire to possess and corrupt the Silmarils led him to commit heinous acts, including the theft of the jewels and the murder of Fëanor's father, High King Finwë. This act set forth the tragic chain of events known as the Oath of Fëanor and the subsequent doom of Mandos, leading to wars, betrayals, and the suffering of countless beings. Morgoth's relentless pursuit of the Silmarils and his delight in the discord and sorrow that followed underscore his nature as a being of pure malice, one who seeks to destroy or twist all that is good and beautiful. It was not enough for him to simply rule, he sought to mar and undo the very fabric of creation, leaving a legacy of pain and ruin that echoed through the ages. And the shadow of Morgoth was ever over them. This quote encapsulates the enduring and pervasive nature of Morgoth's evil, a shadow that stretched across lands and hearts, tainting the world with his destructive envy and malice. Sauron, on the other hand, though undoubtedly cruel and malevolent, was more of a tactician, a deceiver, and a strategist. He desired order, but an order that placed him firmly at the top, controlling the fates of all below. Unlike Morgoth, he sought destruction for its own sake. Sauron desired to dominate and orchestrate a world that, while under his tyrannical rule, would still function and serve his vision of order. Sauron's cunning and strategic mind are perhaps best exemplified by his deception of the elves in the creation of the Rings of Power. Masking his true intentions, he approached the elven smiths of Eregion under the fair guise of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. He counselled them in arts and magic never seen before, leading to the forging of those Rings of Power. But in secret, Sauron crafted the One Ring to rule all others, pouring his own malice and will to dominate into it. This grand deceit not only demonstrated his immense skill and intelligence, but also his ability to betray trust and manipulate others to achieve his own ends. The fallout from this betrayal was immense, leading to wars and mistrust among races that would last for ages. For Sauron was become now a sorcerer of dreadful power, master of shadows and of phantoms, foul in wisdom, cruel in strength, misshaping what he touched. This quote reflects Sauron's immense power and his corrupting influence. As the master of shadows and phantoms, he was not only a sorcerer of dreadful power, but also one who twisted and perverted the very nature of things he involved himself with, embodying the essence of deceit and corruption. Should Sauron somehow manage to bring Morgoth back, it's unlikely their alliance would be harmonious. Morgoth's chaotic nature and desire for destruction would clash with Sauron's more ordered tyranny. Their union could lead to an unprecedented era of darkness, but equally, it might culminate in a power struggle, with each seeking to undermine the other for ultimate control. Such a conflict could lead to further devastation of Middle-earth, as two of the mightiest beings vie for supremacy. The implications of their potential clash or alliance are significant. The peoples of Middle-earth, already wearied by wars and the lingering shadows of evil, would face unimaginable horrors. The very fabric of the world might once again come under threat, echoing the catastrophic battles of earlier ages. This theoretical alliance represents not just a union of power, but a clash of catastrophic intentions, with Middle-earth's very existence hanging in the balance. So there we have it. After delving today deep into the depths of Tolkien's lore, it really makes us think, what would have actually happened if Morgoth and Sauron ever teamed up again? What kind of profound implications would come from such formidable forces either uniting up or clashing against each other? While the resurrection of Morgoth by Sauron seems a near impossibility given the cosmic order established by Ainur and the Valar, the mere contemplation stirs a chilling prospect for Middle-earth. Would their combined might usher in an era of darkness beyond reckoning, or would their divergent natures lead to a destructive rivalry, further fracturing the already scarred lands? It kind of just goes to show that in those twisted, dark corridors of Middle-earth's past, those whispers of Morgoth's return with Sauron's reign were always kind of there in the background. They may actually remind us that perhaps those darkest chapters were yet to be written. But if it did ever come down to it, together they could cast the world in a shadow of unending night. A terrifying thought.